So one of the things that makes DVRT super unique is that these diagonal patterns, these lift and chop patterns, are all throughout not just our corrective exercise programs, but our strength and performance drills too. For example, a max lunge is a lift and chop. A dynamic around the world is a lift and chop. So we really want to establish how to engage the body properly in these diagonal patterns at a very fundamental level. So one of the things that people struggle with the max lunge is they don't build it up from a good foundation. So what I'm going to do is show you an exercise that is not only a good core activation drill and pelvic control drill, but will serve as the foundation to doing your max lunges. So what we're going to do is we're going to actively grab the outside of the bag. So I'm rolling this in. The reason for that is I want more grip. We've talked about grip relating to not just rotator cuff strength, but integrating more of the core and the lats into the motion. Now I'm in a half kneeling position, which is my base lunge position. I'm going to set the bag across my body, and I'm actively pulling apart and pressing through my feet. See how the crease of the elbows are in? I'm not rounding my shoulders in. So keeping this position, pressing down like I just did in the half kneeling arch press, I want to come up and across my body. I'm going to pull it back down, nice and slow. Pull across, and then back down under control. So that diagonal pattern is really opening up my hips, stabilizing that pelvis, and the packing the shoulder connects all those connect chains together. Now over time, as I build proficiency, I can use some of those half kneeling arc presses to help me, but I'm going to show you where we go. So now I create the tension, and as I create that tension and force in the ground, I should feel nice and stable to come up in the lunge. I can now step back, control, back down to half kneeling. Drive, tension, up in the lunge. Now we show some of these other variations in DVRT restoration with the core strap that are really helpful to build and add a little bit of layer of progression, getting feedback from the core strap to help you understand the direction and tension. What I really want you guys to take away the fact is if we go all the way back to the dead bug, what you see is a standing dead bug. All right? So remember when we went back and the leg went out, we're progressing from the floor to more functional positions, eventually leading us to using also a balance step, really learning how to engage the ground, having more frontal plane stability, and making sure I'm engaging my glutes, core, and lats all together. So, setting myself up, I'm down, tension, tension, drive, and I want to come up. Okay? I'm going to come back down, nice and slow, drive up. That little stomp helps me just get enough balance as I can hold it eventually longer, but for a lot of your clients, they're not going to have the tolerance, so they're going to need this quick step as they go in. And what that allows for is to make sure I'm also achieving maximal hip extension. At first, a lot of people will just stand up and they may not get that full hip extension. That's fine, it's progression. Over time, I want to see that strong hip extension come from adding in the role of that balance. Now, any of the movements we perform, we can go in any of the planes of motion. So one of the things that people do is they try to do that sagittal plane motion that I just did. They go, man, that's really hard to transition into that lunge. This isn't a purely linear system as we discussed, so you can jump around a little bit if it makes sense and is a solution for your clients. What I'm meaning is this, going from half kneeling is awesome, but half kneeling to lunging can be very challenging. So we can actually add a frontal plane component going in a lateral motion. Now you might say, isn't the frontal plane more unstable? Yes, but what's happening is I'm creating a bigger base support, so it's a little easier for people to work in. Now I will caution you that is a little bit more challenging than the sagittal plane lunge is the fact that when we step out, you don't want to go into lumbar rotation. A little thoracic rotation is fine, just like we talked about in our max lunge, but you don't want to get into this big lumbar rotation. And part of that is going to become in how you use the ground with your feet and how you grab on the ultimate sandbag. So again, grabbing the bag and creating tension will help lock in those obliques too, so it'll help me resist rotation. As I step out, don't go for the biggest step that you've ever created in your life. Go for a very modest step. Then I bring the weight back to about knee height. I don't need to go much lower than that. I have activity in both legs. I drive through both legs as I'm pulling across up to the body. Back down, up again. So make your client pause here, do a little postural check, making sure they're pushing the both legs, drive up. And just like before, I can start to add a balance step, which then does add a lot more of that frontal plane challenge and single leg stance challenge to your movement. It's a great way to both build some more dimension to your training, but also be a solution if you're having clients struggle going from that half kneeling to sagittal lunge position. The cool thing too is we can add that concept of lift and chops with a lot of different ways. Using our Aries sled, what we can do is a lift and chop action from a couple different patterns. The first one is going straight ahead. So if I'm going to go with my left leg forward, I'm going to grab my right hand on first, the left hand on second. This gives me some tension. Now, it's not as good as grabbing on the bag like we've shown you in the past, but it will give you a good introduction because I don't need as much drive from this backside now. I'll still get some. So I'm going to do really one side at a time. This is sort of a Aries sled max lunge. So I want to make sure when I come down that I have tension upon the straps. I create that tension against the sled, and as I come up, I get in that lift motion. I come down, chop, come out, lift action. So it's a great way that you can teach people how to use the ground, because when I'm in that bomb position, I have to actively be pushing through my feet. Otherwise, I'm not going to feel enough strength to drive myself and keep control of the weight. If I lose tension, if I let my elbows flare out, if I don't have tension against the handles of my feet, I won't feel stable enough through my pelvis and core to develop that force up. So again, some of you that are trying to go to the frontal plane, this could be very friendly too, because you can catch people going that lumbar rotation before it happens. Meaning, when I set up, again, I want to set up outside hand first. I can actually either pivot, and the pivot action is really important because that allows me to make a good transition, and I'm going to come up and across my body. I step out to the side. I want to set up my body, pivot, hip is in action. I'm not windmilling back. I'm not here. I'll be over the top of my hip, come through, up, and out. So another way you can introduce those lift and chop actions, get a cool metabolic effect out of it, and be teaching good movement patterns to your clients. Some other great progressions we've learned about is trying to build, again, how do you get to that point of being a true bird dog without losing proper posture and alignment. So what we've done is actually use the TRX as another bridge from that valve side, because you're not going to have the low angle of the hip and you're not going to get as much feedback, of course. Now again, we're going to start from an iso pull, so setting up is important properly, meaning that we want the bag by Jessica's thighs, not in front of her, and when she sets up in that quadruped position, she's still going to be pushing down in both feet and grabbing the ground. So even though this foot is suspended, she still wants to push down. What she's going to do is grab the opposite handle, pull out first, and then slowly, as she's pushing through that back leg, go to full extension. So that gives her some guidance as she pulls in, and then she can rest the hand down again. So you always want to grab the handle first. That sort of sets up the core. But if this leg goes out to the side or the foot starts to turn out, it gives me immediate feedback upon some of the compensations she has. What will be very common is that people want to release the stance leg. So remember, both feet are active in this equation, and you're going to have to go one side at a time. And you want to go to full lockout if possible, and see how she points the toes towards her, which gets a little bit more glute activation that helps prevent some of that common hip rotation that you'll see with a lot of your clients. So our next progression would be going to iso pull with both legs in here. Now, of course, this takes ground contact away a little bit more, but the other thing it does is that the TRX allows us to see a seesawing action. So you're going to find how to have relative equal pressure through both legs. Obviously, one side is going to be a little bit more loaded than the other, but you don't want to see seesawing action in the TRX. So that's a good feedback tool for yourself, because both feet still have to be pressed in the ground. So she's going to iso pull and slowly kick one leg out, and you see she does a good job maintaining that stability, that the TRX doesn't seesaw back and forth. Then she goes the other side, and again, trying to maintain that pelvic alignment. This gives us a ton of feedback upon how she's engaging her core, her hips, and her upper body at once, and why the tension in the handles are so important. And you see how she's able to keep that crease of the elbow. She's not rotating the elbow out, getting up in the trap or the shoulder during the motion. And then our obvious goal is to add a drag into it. So again, making sure that bag is low to her body, that we still have good alignment, that shoulders are over hands, hips are over knees. She's got to make sure that same seesawing action doesn't happen in the TRX. So she's going to grab on the handle, first load, and then slowly as she can, bring across her body. Plant in the ground again, grabbing the handles first, allows her to load up that core, drag as she pushes through her feet, keeping that tension throughout. So again, this is an exercise, because the complexity of it, is going to be very fatiguing. So you want to do small volume, and you can always regress to some of those other patterns that we just showed you if people are starting to cheat or compensate within the movement. Relax, Jessica. So that you have a way that you keep the quality of work very high and still stay relevant to the exercise. So it's basically, if we went back a step, is like decreasing the weight by 5 or 10 pounds for your clients, so you can keep them working while not having really to alter the implements that you're using.
So we're going to talk about the bent row, and I love this over something other than a suspension trainer row. I really feel it allows the anterior muscles of the neck to relax a bit more. So I prefer this one as a rowing motion. So I'm going to have Sean demonstrate the bent over row. He's going to go ahead, get in the same position as we talked about in the deadlift, pulling the handles apart. He's really engaged with the ground, gripping the ground, pushing through the feet. Now, he's going to get in a nice setup here. Go ahead into that row. Good. So what we're really working on is packing that shoulder. Back down nice and slow. Why don't you do a few reps of those? Working on scapular stabilization here. Also, he's working on that core endurance at the same time. So we're getting that core, lat, shoulder. He's also getting the glutes engaged as well.
Build on what we're doing with the bent row. But it is important. I'm glad Jessica pointed out some of those factors with it, because a lot of people, when it comes to bent rows, they just think of the classic gym exercise, and you see the grunting, the pulling the whole body into it, doing anything but maintain that nice plank and getting that shoulder and scapular retraction that we want. So one of the things about doing this is you're probably going to lighten the load for a lot of people. It's surprising for a lot of people, both the lack of core stability and endurance, as well as actually owning control of that scapular stability. One of the cool things that's happening is we're learning how to keep the core stable as the upper body is moving. So as Jessica alluded to, keeping tension in the ground with the feet is really important to avoid that dumping of the pelvis. Now, I've turned Sean to the side too so you can see that plank. We'll also talk about the benefit of using the ultimate sandbag. There's two really huge benefits. One is that the neutral grip, again, allows us to get a little bit more lat, but you can use neutral grip a lot of different implements. But it's the fact that the weight is far away from the handle, so it's adding a little bit more grip challenge, and any weight of ultimate sandbag is going to be heavier of the equivalent dumbbell, cowbell, or even barbell, because there's no weight in the handle and all the handle's away from us. We're also going to be able to change body position, which we'll show you guys in a couple of minutes. So when Sean sets up, though, he's going to set the back close to him. Now you can work from the top down. So if he deadlifts the weight up, for some people it's easier, and slide down, gripping the ground, creating that tension. Now you see that nice plank. He's already got tension. We're pulling the handles apart, just like your deadlift, to create that lat tension to begin with. A lot of times what causes people to sort of dive into the bent row is they don't create that lat tension until the weight starts moving. See good head alignment. So when he actually rows in, I'm going to pull in, Sean, I should see the scapula fold like I just talked about. And now, if I don't see any scapular movement, that's giving me also an idea that we're going to be limiting the scapular movement when it comes to overhead. So let's see it again, Sean. So I can give him some tactile feedback. Remember, wherever I touch becomes active. So I want to touch him from the area. I want him to feel that activity and relax. So again, having that time under tension is a great way to build that dynamic plank. Also, just talked about building that posterior chain of the glute hamstrings. But being able to do so while having mobility in the upper body is really critical. So what we're going to do in a moment is show you some different gripping options and how to change it with different directions of the. So one of the very easy things to do to make your bent row more challenging is to change the stance that you're in. Now a lot of people, they do the opposite of what we do in DVRT, meaning that most people in the gym, they'll try to create as much stability in their bodies to do a row so they can lift more weight, meaning that they'll put their knee on a bench, they'll put their hand on the bench and they're stabilizing themselves, or they'll put their hand on a dumbbell rack and they'll do a row and they're stabilizing themselves. That's not inherently horrible, but you're just losing some of the integration of these chains of the body, meaning that really we can only develop as much force as our core can allow for. So if we're artificially supporting our core, we're losing actually our functional strength. So what Sean's done is we've started in the bent row position here. So how can we make that a little bit more challenging? Hopefully you guessed it, we have our sprinter stance. So Sean sets up that sprinter stance, that heel toe alignment. He can deadlift the weight up first, or he can start from that position, whatever he's most comfortable with. He's going to basically try to replicate that same row. So the only thing that's changed is his stance. So he's a little less stable. It's about 60% on his lead leg, 40% on his back leg. He's really resisting that rotation in that lower part of his pelvis control. So I can see, does he have frontal plane or transverse plane weakness if he's leveraging himself to one side or the other? You might find the weight change quite dramatically because the change in stability requires so much more core activation. And relax on. So that's a subtle change. The more he steps back, the the more challenging it becomes. Now, it also changed plane of motion. So in a moment, I'll have Sean do a lateral step row. And the nice thing about this is because of the wider base support, it's a little bit more stable for a lot of people. But when people do this, because they're in a weaker position, they tend to want to get vertical. So Sean's got to make sure he's in a good hip hinge position. Remember, we still want that vertical shin. And as I tell people, we really should be able to read your shirt. All right, it should be pointing more towards the ground. So Sean deadlifts the weight up first. And I'll have him actually face you guys. If he steps towards me, it's not a huge step, it's a little step. Now, he wants to try to split the bag in half with his leg. If he has the bag all the way over here, he hasn't shifted laterally enough, okay? So that's sort of our guiding point. From here, he has a nice hip hinge. Now, if we see a lot of rotation of the pelvis, first thing we want to do, cue in more of the foot and more tension in the handles. Once he's set, he's going to slowly row in and back out. Now, because it's a fatiguing position, he can come back to the middle in between, all right? So whenever people are in that bent row position, they can get tired. So again, give them a break by coming out of that position. Come in, this becomes a nice little complex. We're getting shoulder interaction, we're teaching the shoulder to work with the hip, we're getting that core. There's a lot of things going on that if you don't know how the body works, you sort of miss. And next shot. And finally, we get more complex patterns. We get into rotational patterns. And we talked about rotations really where we see those chains come alive. Because a lot of the muscles like your glutes, your obliques, and so forth are not linear muscles. They're more made for these rotational patterns. It's a great way, too, to help people understand alignment and posture in rotation before we do more powerful things in DVRT, or if you want to do things like medicine ball throws, you have to own these positions first. So if Sean deadlifts the weight up, once he comes up, he's going to get his feet a little wider than he was, and he's going to pivot to one side. Now, he doesn't have to come down on the ground, just about knee height. I want that nice plank. I want that strong pivot, so nice tall here. Now he can row from here. He's still driving for this foot and this foot. Now he can come out of it. Nice. That's a fatiguing position, so make sure people don't spend too much time there initially. Go ahead and pivot again, Sean. Now he's also doing a good job. He's not windmilling back towards me. Okay, he's staying over the top like so, pulling in, nice high heel, and then coming up nice and strong. This is a great way. You can add so much variation to that same weighted ultimate sandbag and get different attributes of your functional training out of it and build so much more value out of that bent row.